I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances or state I am. It is a rare thing indeed to learn contentment. This text is like a precious jewel, little yet great in worth and value. A gracious spirit is a contented spirit. The doctrine of contentment is extremely important, and until we have learned this, we have not learned to be Christians. This is a hard lesson. The angels in heaven had not learned it. They were not contented, though their estate was glorious. The angels, who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he has reserved them in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. Jude 1:6. They did not keep their proper estate because they were not content with it. Our first parents, clothed as they were with innocence in paradise, though they had the choice of all the trees in the garden, none would make them content but the tree of knowledge, which they believed would make them omniscient, all-knowing, like God. If this lesson was so hard to learn in their innocent state, how hard shall we find it who are clogged with corruption? Contentment concerns all people, rich and poor alike. It concerns the rich. One would think it needless to press those to contentment whom God has blessed with great estates, to be humble and thankful. But I say, be content. The rich have their discontents as well as others. They may have a great estate, yet are discontented that they have no more. For the drunkard, the more he drinks, the more he thirsts. The same with covetousness. An earthly heart is like the grave, which is never satisfied. Therefore, I say to you who are rich, be content. We may suppose them to be content with honor and magnificent titles, yet they have not always contentment in their relations. Children are a sweet briar, a beautiful rose, a fragrant flower, but it has prickly thorns. Our family comforts are not all pure wine, but mixed, sweet with bitter. No one gains an exemption in this life. Therefore, the rich need to be called on to be content. Contentment also concerns the poor. How hard it is when the livelihood is gone, a great estate taken to almost nothing, and yet to be content. It is hard to be content when poverty comes, but though hard, contentment in poverty is an excellent virtue. The apostle had learned in every state to be content. God brought Paul through a great variety of conditions, and yet he was content, or else he could not have gone through them with so much cheerfulness. We see in 2 Corinthians 4:8 the fluctuations he experienced. We are troubled, hard-pressed on every side. There was sadness in his condition, but not distressed. There is his contentment. And if we read a little further, in troubles, hardships, and calamities, in beatings, imprisonments, and riots, in labor, sleepless nights, and hunger, 2 Corinthians 6:4 and 5. Behold his contentment, as having nothing, yet possessing all things. 2 Corinthians 6:10. When the apostle had nothing, he possessed all. In sufferings, in prisons, in danger of death. 2 Corinthians 11:23-25. Yet behold the blessed frame and temper of his spirit. I have learned, in whatever state I am, to be content. Whichever way providence blew, Paul had such heavenly skill and dexterity that he knew how to steer his course. Of his outward condition he was indifferent. He could either be on the top or the bottom. He could be anything God would have him be. I know what it is to be in need and how to abound. This is a rare pattern for us to imitate. Paul, in regard to his faith and courage, was like a cedar. He could not be stirred. But in regard to his outward condition, he was like a reed bending every way with the wind of providence. When a prosperous gale blew upon him, he could bend with that. And when a boisterous gust of affliction blew, he could bend in humility with that. No matter what his condition, he always responded with contentment. Though God carried him into various conditions, he was not overly elated with one, nor cast down with the other. Like a watch that keeps perfect motion, the spring of his heart was not broken. The wheels of his affections were not disordered, but kept their constant motion toward heaven, still content. Flesh and blood may have fears and disquiets, but grace keeps them afloat. A Christian, having cast anchor in heaven, has a heart that never sinks. A gracious spirit is a contented spirit. This is a rare art. By saying, I have learned, Paul is saying he is initiated into this holy mystery. He has gotten the knack of the divine art. God must make us right artists. To live contented upon God in the deficiency of outward comforts is an art which flesh and blood has not learned. Matthew 16:17. Many of God's own children who excel in some duties of religion have scarcely begun to learn this art. To illustrate this doctrine, I will put forward these questions. 1. Should a Christian be indifferent about his circumstances? No, for then he is not a saint but a Stoic. Rachel did well to weep for her children. Her fault was that she refused to be comforted. That is discontent. Christ himself was keenly aware of what was about to happen. He sweat great drops of blood and said, Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. But he was content with the will of God, and he submitted to his Father's will. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, so that in due time he may exalt you. 1 Peter 5:6. 2. Can a Christian lay out his complaints to God? Yes. For I have pleaded my cause before you, Jeremiah 20:12, and David poured out his complaint before the Lord, Psalm 142:2. We may cry out to God and tell him all our injuries. Shall not a child complain to his father? When we have burdens on our hearts, prayer brings relief. Hannah's spirit was burdened. I am a woman of a sorrowful spirit. But after she prayed, she was no longer sad. That is the difference between a holy complaint and a discontented complaint. In one, we complain to God. In the other, we complain about God. 3. What should the Christian not be content about? Angry complaining, because murmuring and complaining is mutiny against God. When the heart is discontent, you have anger, grumbling, and impatience. Murmuring, grumbling, and complaining are the consequence of a discontented heart. You should not be content with discomposure. When you are distracted and in confusion and disorder, discontent disjoints the soul and pulls it off its wheels. And finally, you should not be content with childish despondency. This is usually a result of discomposure, confusion, and worry. Worry is a heavy burden. It overloads the spirits and sinks them. A despondent spirit is a discontented, spirit. Contentment is a sweet temper of spirit. It is a Christian who carries himself with stability in every condition. The nature of contentment will be clear in these three fundamentals. 1. Contentment is divine. It becomes ours not by acquisition, but as a gift. It is planted by the Spirit of God in the soul. Learning contentment does not come from human learning, but is of the heavenly birth. It is therefore very observable that contentment is joined with godliness. Godliness with contentment is great gain. 1 Timothy 6:6. Contentment is an outgrowth of godliness. I call it divine to distinguish it from the contentment that a moral person can come to. Sometimes unbelievers seem to have contentment, but this is only a shadow of divine contentment. Theirs is civil. Divine contentment is sacred. Theirs is only from principles of human reason, which may teach a little contentment, but divine contentment is from the Spirit of God. To live securely and cheerfully upon God only comes from devotion and reverence. 2. Contentment is internal. It lies within. The root of contentment has both its fountain and stream in the soul. As sorrow is seated in the spirit, the heart knows its own bitterness. So contentment lies within the soul and does not depend upon externals. Outward troubles cannot hinder this blessed contentment. It is a spiritual thing and arises from spiritual grounds. The comprehension of God's love. When there is a tempest without, there may be music within. The soul that possesses this rich treasure of contentment is like Noah in the ark, singing in the midst of a deluge. 3. Contentment is habitual. It shines like a fixed light in the soul. Contentment does not appear only now and then. It is the settled temperament of the heart. He that is said to be a contented man is given to contentment. It remains constant. One is not content if he is only content on some occasions, or when things are going well. For the truly contented man, this is the habit and countenance of his soul.